Israel signed nothing. That is the detail every major news outlet buried beneath the headlines of celebration. On the 15th of June 2026, the United States and Iran reached an initial agreement to extend their ceasefire and move toward a formal signing on the 19th of June in Geneva. The world exhaled. Markets recovered. Leaders congratulated themselves. And within hours, Israeli forces launched a fresh offensive across southern Lebanon. Not a skirmish, not a minor engagement, a coordinated military campaign, continuing as if no agreement existed at all. Because for Israel, no agreement does exist. Israel was not a signatory to this deal. Israel was not consulted on its final terms. And Israel's leadership has made clear, in public, on record, that it does not consider itself bound by what Washington and Tehran agreed. This is not a footnote. This is the fault line that could bring the entire framework crashing down before the ink is dry. What the media is telling you is that the war is effectively over, that Trump delivered a historic deal, that the Strait of Hormuz is reopening and the Middle East is stepping back from the edge. What the media is not telling you is that there are now three separate actors, the United States, Iran, and Israel, each operating on a completely different set of objectives, and only two of them signed anything. Let us begin with what actually happened in the 48 hours surrounding this agreement. The deal signed electronically on Sunday, the 14th of June, was described as an initial memorandum of understanding. It calls for an immediate and permanent cessation of hostilities between the United States and Iran. It calls for the lifting of the American naval blockade on Iranian ports. It calls for the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. And it establishes a 60-day window for negotiations on Iran's nuclear program. That is what the document contains. What the document does not contain is any mechanism to compel Israel to halt its operations in Lebanon. And that omission is not accidental. It reflects a fundamental disagreement between Washington and Jerusalem that has been building for weeks. A disagreement that the Trump administration chose to paper over rather than resolve. And that decision may prove to be the most consequential mistake of this entire diplomatic process. Now let us go to the first key point. Netanyahu does not accept this deal, and he has said so publicly. Standing before reporters on the 15th of June, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stated that he would continue fighting to prevent Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons. And he added, as long as he is Prime Minister, Iran will not obtain them. He was not speaking about the future. He was speaking about now. Netanyahu also made a confession that received almost no analysis in the Western press. He acknowledged that he was not familiar with the exact details of the memorandum of understanding reached between the Trump administration and Iran. Read that again. The Prime Minister of Israel, whose country initiated this war alongside the United States on the 28th of February, admitted he did not know what was inside the deal that was supposed to end it.
That is not a diplomatic nuance. That is a rupture.
Defense Minister Israel Katz went further. He stated plainly that the Israel Defense Forces would not withdraw from southern Lebanon.
Not today.
Not under this deal. Not under any deal that does not result in the complete dismantling of Hezbollah. And ultra-nationalist National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir posted publicly that Israel must not compromise on anything less than the full dismantlement of Hezbollah. This is not a fringe position inside the Israeli government. This is the governing coalition speaking with one voice, and that voice is saying no. What makes this more alarming is the timeline. Israel and the United States launched this war together. They struck Iran together on the 28th of February. They assassinated Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei together. And now, 100 days later, the United States has signed a ceasefire that its own military partner refuses to honor. That is not an alliance functioning normally. That is an alliance fracturing in real time. The second key point is what this means for the deal itself. The agreement between the United States and Iran is structurally fragile. It depends on a 60-day window of calm in which technical negotiations can begin on Iran's nuclear file. Those negotiations require that the military situation on the ground remain stable. But Israel controls the military situation in Lebanon, and Israel is not stopping. Former United States Ambassador to Israel, Daniel Shapiro, laid out the danger with precision. He noted that all Hezbollah needs is to fire one rocket into a northern Israeli town, and the pressure on Netanyahu from his own base and from the opposition will become impossible to resist. That gives Hezbollah, and by extension Iran, enormous leverage over the entire process. One rocket, one incident, and the 60-day window collapses. This is not a hypothetical. This is the operational reality of a ceasefire that was announced without the consent of the party that is still actively fighting on the ground. Iran understands this dynamic perfectly. Tehran does not need to fire a single missile to create pressure on the agreement. It simply needs to allow Hezbollah to operate and wait for Israel to react. The provocation does not even need to come from Iran directly. It just needs to happen. And in southern Lebanon right now, the conditions for that kind of incident are present every single day. The third key point is what is happening inside Israel itself. The Israeli public reacted to this deal with fury. Israelis from across the political spectrum, left, right, and center, described the agreement as a disaster for Israel. And they directed that fury not at Trump. They directed it at Netanyahu. This matters enormously. Netanyahu entered this war with the full weight of Israeli public support behind him. He launched the campaign with a clear objective: destroy Iran's nuclear infrastructure and permanently degrade its military capability. Neither objective was achieved. Iran's nuclear program remains intact. Iran's regional proxy network in Yemen, in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon has been degraded but not dismantled. And now Netanyahu is standing before his own people, telling them that the war is paused, not won. His coalition partners are turning on him. His base is furious. And his own acknowledgement that he did not know the details of the deal suggests that the Trump administration moved faster than Jerusalem expected and did not wait for Israeli approval. The relationship between Trump and Netanyahu, which was presented to the world as a historic partnership, is showing its first serious fractures. When partners in a military alliance begin making separate peace agreements without each other's knowledge, the alliance itself is in question. Now let us talk about the implications of all of this. The formal signing is scheduled for the 19th of June in Geneva, but between now and then, Israel's military operations in Lebanon continue. Iran has warned that any Israeli escalation that crosses certain thresholds could force Tehran to reconsider its participation in the Geneva process. That warning has not been widely reported. It should be, because it means the deal's survival depends not on what Washington and Tehran decide, but on what Netanyahu decides to do in the next 72 hours. There is also the question of what Iran actually gains from this agreement. Tehran enters the 60-day negotiation window with its nuclear infrastructure intact, its stockpile of highly enriched uranium undeclared, and its regional influence battered but not broken. In exchange, it receives the lifting of the naval blockade, access to frozen assets, and the prospect of sanctions relief. That is not a position of defeat. That is a negotiating platform. Iran's strategy is now clear. Defeat, Genoshet, negotiate, wait for the American midterm elections in November, and use Israel's ongoing aggression in Lebanon as justification for any breakdown in the process. The Group of Seven summit in France, which opened on the 16th of June, added another layer of complexity. European leaders have welcomed the deal, but made clear that sanctions relief is conditional on Iran taking verifiable steps on its nuclear program. Trump cut short his attendance at the summit, citing the Middle East situation. a signal that Washington is not confident the deal will hold through the week. Now my two predictions. First, Israel will conduct a significant military action in Lebanon before the 19th of June signing in Geneva. The domestic pressure on Netanyahu is too intense, his coalition too fragile, and his military objectives too incomplete for him to simply stand down. A major strike, framed as a response to a Hezbollah provocation, is the most likely near-term development. Whether that strike collapses the Geneva process depends entirely on how Tehran chooses to respond. Second, the United States and Iran will sign something in Geneva on the 19th of June. But it will be a document that deliberately leaves the hardest questions unresolved. Iran's nuclear stockpile, its enrichment capacity, and its missile program will all be deferred to further negotiations. The 60-day window will expire without a final agreement, and a second extension will be proposed. This is not a peace deal. This is a managed pause, designed to allow both Washington and Tehran to claim victory while the underlying conflict remains completely unresolved. The question is not whether this deal will hold indefinitely. The question is how long it holds and who breaks it first. Now I want to hear from you. Do you believe Netanyahu will actually comply with this ceasefire? Or will Israel's actions in Lebanon destroy the Geneva signing before it even happens? Tell me in the comments below. If this gave you something the mainstream media did not, subscribe to this channel. I will see you in the next one.